My name is Serena Waller, and at 19 years old, standing in my Marine Corps dress blues, I believed I had finally escaped hell. The promotion ceremony stage at Camp Lejeune was the pinnacle of honor, proof that I wasn't the invisible shadow my family in Charleston had always wanted me to be. But as my name was called, my stepbrother, Jacob, walked in. In front of my entire command, he rushed the stage and drove his knee into my stomach. The pain was searing, but it was nothing compared to the warm gush of blood that began to spread, staining my pristine white belt crimson. The child I was carrying, my tiny secret hope, was dying on the very stage of my triumph. Amid the dead silence, I looked to my mother, searching for salvation. She just stared at the floor. And then Jacob roared. She deserved it. She's a disgrace to this family. They thought they had killed my future. They didn't know they had just awakened a warrior. If you have ever been pushed down by your own family as you tried to rise, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button, and get ready for a story of betrayal and Marine Corps justice. The air in the base auditorium at Camp Lejeune was thick with pride. It was a tangible thing, something you could almost taste, a mix of floor polish, starched fabric, and the collective dignity of the United States Marine Corps. I stood at parade rest, my spine a steel rod, my shoulders squared. My dress blue uniform was perfect. The dark blue jacket pressed with razor-sharp creases, the brass buttons on my tunic polished to a blinding sheen. On my collar, the eagle, globe, and anchor insignia felt heavier than metal. It felt like worth. This was the culmination of it all. The sleepless nights spent studying regulations, the endless miles of forced marches under a blistering sun, the rivers of sweat poured onto the unforgiving sand of the Paris Island training grounds. Every drill instructor's roaring voice, every grueling obstacle course had been a chisel, chipping away at the scared, unwanted girl from Charleston and revealing the Marine underneath. My stepfather, Harold, a retired Army colonel who saw the Marines as a lesser tribe, had always said I'd never make it. "You don't have the spine for it, Serena," he'd sneer over dinner. Now, here I was, about to have a new stripe pinned on my sleeve. Promoted to the rank of Corporal Serena Waller. The announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. A wave of applause rippled through the audience of fellow Marines and their families. This was it. This was my identity. Something that was mine alone. Something no one could ever take away from me. As I began my crisp, measured walk toward the center of the stage, my eyes scanned the front row. I found my mother, Linda, seated next to Harold. I searched her face for a glimmer of a smile, a spark of pride for her daughter. All I received was a stiff, almost imperceptible nod. Harold didn't even look at me. His gaze was fixed on the American flag behind the stage, his jaw tight. A familiar pang of disappointment hit me, but I pushed it down. It didn't matter. This moment was still mine. But as I reached the commanding officer, a movement at the side entrance caught my eye. A ghost from my past hell had just materialized. It was Jacob. He wasn't in a suit or even a collared shirt. He wore faded jeans and a nondescript gray t-shirt, a deliberate act of disrespect to the ceremony, to my uniform, to everything this moment stood for. He slouched against the doorframe, his arms crossed, a contemptuous smirk twisting his lips. He scanned the room, then his eyes locked onto me. It was a look that made my blood run cold, a look that stripped away the uniform and the rank and left me feeling like a helpless child again. A knot of pure dread tightened in my gut. It was the exact same look he'd given me when I was 8, right before he'd twisted the arm off my favorite doll just to watch me cry. It was the same look he'd worn when he told his high school friends I was just the bastard my mom brought home. He wasn't here to celebrate. He was here to destroy. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that something terrible was about to happen. He pushed himself off the wall and started walking, not towards the seats, but directly towards the stage. A few heads turned, confused. My commanding officer paused, his hand hovering over the new chevrons. Jacob moved with a predatory grace, his eyes never leaving mine. He mounted the steps in 2 quick strides. The room fell silent. There was no shouting, no argument. just his focused, hateful advance. Time seemed to warp, stretching and thinning until all I could hear was the frantic pounding of my own heart against my ribs. Then, it happened. His motion was brutally efficient. There was no shove, no preamble. He closed the last few feet between us and drove his knee, hard, into my abdomen. A guttural oof sound escaped my lips, as the air was violently forced from my lungs. The pain was immediate and blinding. A white-hot explosion that felt like an iron fist crushing my insides. My vision swam with black spots. My knees buckled, and I crumpled to the polished floor, my formal white cover tumbling from my head and rolling away. Then came a new sensation. A sickening, warm wetness spreading through the fabric of my uniform. I looked down. A dark stain was blossoming against the pristine white of my ceremonial belt. A horrifying crimson flower. It wasn't just blood. It was my future. My secret. My tiny, fragile hope, spilling out of me and onto the stage of my greatest achievement. Through the haze of pain, my eyes desperately sought my mother. Help me. Please. She sat frozen, her face a blank mask. And then, in a move that was infinitely more cruel than the physical blow, she turned her head, her gaze dropping to stare intently at the floor. She had abandoned me. At my side, I saw Harold. He wasn't looking at Jacob with rage. His hands were clenched into tight fists, his knuckles white, his expression one of pure fury. Directed at me. He was angry that I had caused this scene. A collective gasp went through the auditorium, a wave of shock that was quickly swallowed by a stunned, heavy silence. In that silence, every eye was on me. The fallen Marine. The spectacle of shame. The pain of the attack was immense, but the humiliation was a physical weight, pressing me down, suffocating me. Then Jacob's voice, a triumphant roar that shattered the stillness, echoed through the hall. She deserved it. She's a disgrace to this family. Before the words had even finished echoing, a figure moved with disciplined speed. General Thorne, the base commander, strode to the front of the stage. He didn't spare Jacob a single glance. His eyes, sharp and clear, were fixed first on me, then on his subordinate officers. His voice wasn't a shout, but it cut through the tension with the cold authority of steel. This is an assault on a United States Marine on active duty. Military police, apprehend the suspect and secure the scene. Every word was deliberate, powerful. The MPs moved instantly, converging on a stunned Jacob. General Thorne's gaze returned to me, his expression unreadable, but his voice unwavering. And get a corpsman up here now. We have a Marine down. A Marine down. Not a disgrace, not a family problem. A Marine. In that moment of absolute betrayal from my own blood, that one phrase from a stranger was a lifeline. It was a declaration that I belonged to a different family now. A family that did not turn away. A family that, under the code of Semper Fidelis, was always faithful. And they were about to prove it. The sterile white of the hospital room was a blank canvas, and against my will, memory began to paint. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was a cruel metronome, counting out the seconds and dragging me back to a time when hope, not pain, was the thing that made my chest ache. The attack on the stage hadn't just broken my body, it had shattered a lock on a room in my mind I had tried so hard to keep sealed. A room filled with the ghosts of every humiliation that had led me there. The most vivid ghost was from my high school graduation day. I had been named valedictorian, the #1 student in a class of over 400. For months I'd poured my soul into that achievement, fueled by an almost desperate need to create a success so undeniable, so public, that even my stepfather, Harold, would be forced to acknowledge it. I spent countless nights hunched over my desk, rewriting my commencement speech until every word shone. I wanted it to be perfect. For them. For me. I'd used the money from my part-time job at a local bookstore to buy a simple white dress. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. It was clean and bright and felt like a fresh start. Standing on that podium, looking out at the sea of faces, I saw my mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. For one fragile, foolish moment, a spark of hope ignited in my chest. I thought, this is it. This is the time it changes. I believed that my achievement was finally big enough for them to see me, truly see me, past the long eclipsing shadow of my stepbrother, Jacob. That hope lasted for the duration of the car ride home. When we pulled into the driveway, I saw the party was already in full swing in our backyard. But something was wrong. The balloons tied to the deck railing weren't the school colors of blue and gold. They were green and silver, the colors of Jacob's varsity football team. A massive banner was strung between two oak trees, and in huge, professionally painted letters, it read, "Congratulations to our future champion." My heart sank. Harold, a beer in hand, had his arm slung around Jacob's shoulders. He was holding court with a group of his friends, his voice booming across the yard. "Full ride scholarship, I'm telling you. The scouts are already calling. My boy is going to be a star." All the attention, all the energy, all the pride in the yard was a vortex swirling around Jacob. And me? The valedictorian? My mother gently took the folder with my speech from my hands, set it on a side table, and then pressed a heavy plastic tray into them. "Serena, honey, could you take some drinks around? The guests are getting thirsty." Just like that, in my simple white dress of hope, I was demoted from the guest of honor to the catering staff at my own graduation party. As I navigated the crowded lawn with a tray of sweating glasses of fruit punch, the cloying, sweet smell suddenly transported me to another time, another party, another, far worse, humiliation. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was Thanksgiving, 2 years earlier. The whole extended family was there. The dining room table was gleaming, laden with the classic American feast: a golden brown turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, and the deep, rich red of my mother's famous cranberry sauce. I had just served myself a slice of turkey when Jacob, sitting across from me, leaned forward. He didn't say a word. He just locked his eyes on mine, a slow, malicious smirk spreading across his face. And then he did it. He hawked and spat, a thick, disgusting glob of saliva that sailed across the table and landed squarely on the turkey on my plate. The sound it made, a wet, revolting smack, turned my stomach. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth, every muscle in my body paralyzed with shock and disgust. But the most horrific part wasn't the act itself. It was the reaction. Harold, seated at the head of the table, saw the whole thing. He let out a great booming laugh that shook his entire body. "Just adding a little flavor, Serena," he roared, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. "Eat up." He thought it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. My mother's face went pale. She shot out of her chair and snatched my plate, but not to confront Jacob. She leaned down, her voice a frantic, urgent whisper in my ear. "Don't make a scene, Serena. For God's sake, just let it go." She was more terrified of a social disruption than she was outraged by her son's vile degradation of her daughter. She threw the plate in the kitchen trash and told me to just eat the side dishes. The memory was so visceral it made me shudder there in the backyard, causing the glasses on my tray to rattle. As if on cue, Jacob and his football buddies swaggered past me. He didn't even look at me. He just jutted out his hip, a casual, deliberate motion that sent my tray tilting. Bright red punch cascaded down the front of my white dress. "Oops, clumsy," he sneered, flashing the exact same smirk from that Thanksgiving. He didn't stop walking. Harold saw it from across the lawn. His voice cut through the party chatter, sharp and annoyed. "Serena, get that cleaned up. Don't you dare ruin your brother's party." Your brother's party. I stood there, frozen, dripping in red punch that looked like blood against the white fabric. And in that moment, I understood. The spit, the punch, it made no difference. In their eyes, I was not a person to be celebrated. I was just something to be stained, something to be spoiled, a background character whose only purpose was to make their golden boys shine brighter. The stain wasn't an accident, it was my designated place in the family portrait. If you know exactly what it feels like to have your biggest accomplishment treated like it was nothing, hit the like button for every person out there who has felt invisible. And tell me in the comments one achievement of yours that deserved a parade. I want to celebrate it with you. That night, alone in my room, I stared at my reflection in the dark window. The proud valedictorian from the morning was gone, replaced by a girl in a soiled dress. her face streaked with tears she refused to let make a sound. The question that had been a whisper in the back of my mind for years finally screamed for an answer. Was there anywhere on this earth where I would be treated like a human being? The answer to that question was Paris Island. The bus ride to Paris Island, South Carolina, was the answer to the question I had screamed into my pillow. The air that hit me when the doors hissed open was like a physical wall, thick, humid, and buzzing with the deafening chorus of cicadas, the sound of the low country itself. Then came the human noise, the screaming. It tore through the air, raw and ferocious. From the throats of men and women in crisp uniforms and campaign hats, the legendary drill instructors. Get off the bus. You are no longer mommy's little darlings. You belong to the United States Marine Corps now. Yellow footprints were painted on the asphalt, and we were ordered onto them, our civilian lives ending the second our sneakers touched the paint. For the other recruits stumbling off the bus, wide-eyed and terrified, this was a culture shock of the highest order. For me, it was strangely familiar. I had grown up in a house of yelling. But this was different. Harold and Jacob's rage was chaotic, personal, and designed to break me down for their own satisfaction. This was structured. This had a purpose. This was not about destroying me. It was about forging me into something new. The days that followed blurred into a relentless cycle of deconstruction and reconstruction. Life became a series of motions, repeated until they were etched into muscle memory. Pre-dawn marches where the world was still gray and silent, our boots the only rhythm. Obstacle courses under a punishing sun that beat down on the back of my neck, turning the air into a shimmering haze. Hours spent in the sweltering armory, disassembling and cleaning my rifle until my hands were raw and blistered, the smell of gun oil permanently ingrained in my skin. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest. My lungs burned with every ragged breath. I was being systematically broken down, stripped of my individuality, and remade into a single, functioning part of a larger whole. There was no Serena Waller anymore. There was only Recruit Waller. The ultimate test was the Crucible, a brutal 54-hour combat simulation designed to be the final forge. With minimal food and even less sleep, we were pushed beyond every conceivable limit. On the second night, during a long, forced march through a swampy trail, my body finally gave out. My legs buckled, and I collapsed into the mud, my pack feeling like it was filled with lead. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe, I was done. As I lay there, ready to quit, two images flashed in my mind's eye with startling clarity. Jacob's sneering, triumphant smirk as he spat on my food, and Harold's cold, dismissive eyes as he called my graduation a ruin. A surge of white-hot anger, hotter than the South Carolina sun, flooded my veins. It was a fuel more potent than any food or rest. The pain from my family was a deeper, more familiar wound than the pain in my muscles. I knew that pain. I had lived with it my whole life. This physical agony was temporary. The agony of returning to Charleston a failure would be eternal. I clenched my jaw, tasting mud and grit, and forced myself back to my feet. I hefted my pack, squared my shoulders, and kept marching. The past I was running from had just become the engine that propelled me forward. But escaping the ghosts of my family was one thing. Escaping the need for them was another. The most sacred ritual at Paris Island was mail call. Every evening, after the final formation, a drill instructor would walk into the barracks, a sack of letters slung over his shoulder. It was the one moment the constant tension broke. Recruits would hear their names, and a wave of relief would wash over their faces. They'd sit on their footlockers, some crying silently as they read words of love and support, others laughing at jokes from home. It was their lifeline to the world they'd left behind, a reminder of why they were enduring this hell. I sat on my own footlocker and watched, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. I had written 3 letters home to Charleston. Not begging, not complaining, just short factual notes about the training, about the challenges. I held on to a sliver of hope that my mother, seeing me truly trying to build a life, might send back a single line of encouragement. Anything. But my name was never called. The mailbox for Waller S. was always empty. The silence from Charleston was louder than any drill instructor's scream. It was a confirmation of my worthlessness, a final abandonment in my moment of greatest need. One evening, a tough-as-nails drill instructor, Gunnery Sergeant Reyes, a Hispanic woman with eyes that could bore through steel, noticed my solitary vigil. She'd been watching me for weeks. After mail call was over and the sounds of quiet sobbing and rustling paper filled the barracks, she walked over and stood before me. She didn't yell. She spoke in a low, measured voice that cut through the noise. "Waller," she said, "the family you're looking for isn't out there." She gestured vaguely towards the world beyond the base. "It's right here." She nodded towards the other recruits, my platoon sisters, who were sharing cookies from home and reading letters aloud to each other. "Look at the sisters by your side. This is your family now." Her words hit me harder than any physical blow ever had. She was right. The family defined by blood had failed me at every turn. But this new family, forged in sweat and mud and shared hardship, was all around me. The moment of truth came after we completed the crucible. We stood on the parade deck, exhausted, filthy, but standing tall. One by one, our drill instructors, the same people who had screamed us into dust for weeks, now approached us with a look of profound respect. Gunnery Sergeant Reyes stopped in front of me. In her hand, she held the sacred symbol we had bled for: the eagle, globe, and anchor. She looked me straight in the eye. "Welcome to the Brotherhood, Marine," she said, her voice thick with emotion. As she pressed the sharp pins of the insignia into the collar of my uniform, a pain I barely registered, something inside me finally broke. Tears, hot and uncontrollable, streamed down my face for the first time in 13 weeks. They weren't tears of sadness or pain. They were tears of arrival. For the first time in my entire life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. This uniform was my home. These women were my sisters. I had found my honor, my identity, and my family. Not in the manicured lawns of Charleston, but here, in the camaraderie forged by sweat and blood. Leaving Paris Island was like stepping out of a forge and into the real world again. I was posted to Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, assigned to a communications unit. The constant, high-stakes pressure of boot camp was replaced by the focused, technical demands of my job. The screaming of drill instructors faded, replaced by the crackle of radio static and the quiet hum of servers. Here, value wasn't measured in how much you could endure, but in how well you did your job and how much your fellow Marines could count on you. It was in this new, structured quiet that I began to cautiously unfurl the parts of myself I had kept locked down for years. It was here I met my first real friends. There was Maria, a fast-talking, perpetually cheerful Marine from a small town in Texas, who put Tabasco hot sauce on everything from her eggs to her apple pie, and wasn't afraid to tell a captain he was wrong. And then there was Ben, a quiet, steady guy from rural Ohio who could fix anything with a Leatherman and a roll of duct tape. He spoke in half sentences but could communicate more with a single nod than most people could with a full speech. They were my team. They didn't ask me about my family or where I came from. In the Corps, your past is less important than your present performance. They accepted me for the Marine I was, quiet, diligent, and utterly reliable. For the first time, I was part of a group where my worth was simply a given. I did my job, I had their backs, and they had mine. It was a simple, clean transaction of trust, and it felt more like home than my actual home ever had. My 19th birthday fell on a Tuesday. I didn't mention it to anyone. Birthdays in Harold's house were a non-event for me, usually forgotten, because they coincided with one of Jacob's football games or some other, more important family matter. I expected the day to pass just like any other: morning PT, a 12-hour shift, and then back to the barracks. That evening, when I pushed open the door to my barracks room, it was pitch black. The light switch didn't work. My Paris Island training kicked in instantly. My body tensed, my senses went on high alert, and I instinctively dropped into a low, defensive crouch. My mind raced through threat assessments. Suddenly, the lights flickered on. Standing in the middle of the small room were Maria, Ben, and a half-dozen other Marines from our unit. They were huddled around a cardboard box from the local pizza joint and were in the middle of a terribly off-key rendition of Happy Birthday. I just stood there, frozen in my defensive stance, blinking in the sudden light like a startled animal. I didn't know what to do. I'd never had a surprise party. I'd never had any kind of party. Maria, laughing at my reaction, came over and pulled me up. "Relax, Waller," she said, steering me toward the pizza. "At ease, Marine. It's your birthday." Ben held out a single, slightly lopsided cupcake with a cheap wax candle stuck in the frosting, its small flame dancing. They finished their song with a loud, enthusiastic cheer. I stared at the tiny flame, and my mind went completely blank. I didn't have any wishes prepared. I'd never been in a position to make one. The sheer, unexpected kindness of it all was overwhelming. This wasn't a grand gesture. It was pizza in a box and a 99-cent cupcake from the PX. But to me, it felt like a state dinner. It was the fact that they had remembered, that they had noticed, that my existence on this particular day was a reason for them to gather and smile. After I awkwardly blew out the candle, Maria handed me a small, clumsily wrapped box. "We all pitched in," she said, her usual bravado softened by a genuine warmth. My fingers fumbled with the wrapping paper. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, was a simple, elegant silver chain bracelet. It was thin and delicate, but as I picked it up, I saw a small metal tag attached to it. Etched into the silver were two words, the most sacred words in our world: Semper Fi. "It's short for Semper Fidelis," Ben said quietly, speaking a full sentence for once. "Always faithful." Maria put her hand on my shoulder. "So you remember you're never alone, you hear me?" she said, her Texas accent thick with sincerity. "You've always got us." That's when the dam I had so carefully constructed inside me finally broke. For all the years of silent endurance, for all the tears I had swallowed, this simple act of decency was the thing that finally brought them to the surface. I started to cry, not the quiet, hidden sobs of my childhood, but deep, shoulder-shaking sobs of profound, heartbreaking gratitude. It wasn't just a bracelet. It was a promise. It was an anchor. It was the first piece of evidence I had ever held in my hand that I mattered to someone. That night, I fell asleep with the bracelet on my wrist, the cool metal a comforting weight against my skin. For the first time in my life, I felt completely and truly safe. I felt loved. The warmth and security of my new family began to heal the old wounds. I started to believe that a different kind of life was possible. I even started dating another Marine, a nice guy from a different unit. It was a short-lived relationship, but it left me with an unexpected gift. One morning, after feeling off for a couple of weeks, I took a test from the base exchange. 2 pink lines appeared on the plastic stick almost instantly. Pregnant. A wave of ice-cold fear washed over me, followed by something else, something I hadn't expected. A fierce, quiet joy. This would be my family. A tiny human being that was mine to love, mine to protect. A child who would never, ever be made to feel the way I had. It was this newfound hope that led to my fatal miscalculation. I was getting promoted soon, a ceremony that represented my success and stability. I decided that this would be the perfect time to tell my family in Charleston. I imagined that the news of a grandchild, their first grandchild, might be the one thing powerful enough to finally bridge the chasm between us. It was a foolish, desperate hope, a naive and deadly one. The fragile peace I had built around myself at Camp Lejeune was shattered by a phone call. I had sent a letter to Charleston, a simple, formal invitation to my promotion ceremony. I didn't mention the pregnancy. I wanted to tell them that news in person, holding on to the naive hope that seeing my success, my uniform, and then hearing about their future grandchild all at once might somehow melt the years of ice. My mother called a few days later. Her number flashing on my screen gave me a jolt, a mix of childish hope and conditioned dread. I answered, my voice brighter than I felt. "Hi, Mom." There was no warmth in her reply. "Serena, I got your invitation." A pause. "Your stepfather and I were talking. Is it really necessary to have such a big ceremony?" I was stunned into silence. "What?" Well, you know your brother Jacob is having a hard time finding a job right now, she said, her voice dropping into a tone of gentle, conspiratorial reason. You being so successful, it makes him feel bad. It's putting a lot of stress on the family. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The words were so absurd, so twisted that my mind struggled to process them. Mom, it's my promotion. It's part of my career in the Marine Corps. I didn't do this at him. I know that, sweetie, she cooed, and that single word, sweetie, was a weapon, designed to make me feel like an unreasonable child. But family is about supporting each other, isn't it? Try not to make everything about you. The call ended with her promising to see what they could do, leaving me with a familiar, bitter taste in my mouth. Guilt. It was an old poison, one they had fed me my entire life. I was the selfish one. I was the difficult one. I was the source of the family's problems. For a few hours, her words worked their dark magic. I sat in my barracks room, the calm order of my military life feeling a million miles away, and I actually wondered if I should cancel. Then Jacob called. The caller ID showed his name, and my hand trembled as I answered. There was no pretense, no manipulation, just pure, uncut venom. So, I hear you're getting another stripe, he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. Don't get a big head. You think that uniform makes you better than anyone? Let me tell you something. You're still just the stray my mom dragged home. A stain. I stood perfectly still, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. I didn't say a word. My silence only fueled his rage. I'm coming to your little party, he hissed. I'm going to show all your jarhead friends exactly what you are. The line went dead. My blood ran cold. It wasn't an idle taunt. It was a promise. An icy finger of real fear traced its way down my spine. The final call came from Harold. He didn't yell like Jacob or wheedle like my mother. He used the voice I remembered from my childhood, the one that made colonels and generals snap to attention. The voice of absolute, unquestionable command. Corporal Waller, he began, using my rank as an insult. I've been informed of your condition. You have disgraced the Waller name, and you have disgraced that uniform. This is an embarrassment. My breath caught in my throat. My mother had told him. She had betrayed my confidence before I even had a chance to share my news. I expect you to handle this problem of yours quietly and discreetly, he continued, his voice cold and hard as granite. And you will cancel that ridiculous ceremony. Do not force me to travel all the way to North Carolina to witness this family's humiliation in person. A problem. My baby. He had called my baby a problem. A switch flipped inside me. The guilt, the fear, the years of ingrained obedience, it all vanished, burned away by a sudden, clarifying rage. The quiet, disciplined life I'd built was under direct assault. They were trying to tear it all down, to drag me back into the chaos and misery of their world. That night, sleep was impossible. The toxic words of my family echoed in my head, a three-part chorus of manipulation, hatred, and command. I sat on the edge of my bunk in the dark, the weight of their combined assault pressing down on me. I glanced down at my wrist. The silver of the Semper Fi bracelet caught the faint moonlight coming through the window. You are not alone. Maria's voice. This is your family now. Gunnery Sergeant Reyes's words. They were right. I was not that scared little girl anymore. I was a United States Marine. And a Marine never goes into a fight unprepared. My mind flashed back to a lesson from intelligence training at boot camp. Your best weapon, the instructor had said, is credible evidence. Information is ammunition. The next morning, I felt a cold, hard resolve settle in my gut. After my shift, I took a bus off base to a strip mall in Jacksonville. I walked into an electronics store and bought a small, powerful digital voice recorder, the kind journalists use. Then I went to a cell phone kiosk and had them install a call recording app on my phone, one that activated automatically. Walking back to the base, the weight of the small device in my pocket felt significant. It felt like the cold, reassuring weight of a weapon. I didn't know exactly how or when I would use this ammunition. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was done being a silent victim. I was done letting them control the narrative. From this moment on, every word they used against me would be recorded. Every threat, every lie, every manipulative whisper. The war had begun. In the few days leading up to the promotion ceremony, I tried to build a wall around my mind. I focused on my duties, the familiar, grounding rhythm of work. I went to the chow hall for dinner with Maria and Ben, letting their easy banter wash over me, trying to soak in the normalcy, the simple peace of their friendship. They could tell something was wrong. My smiles were tight, my shoulders tense. Ben, in his quiet, observant way, finally broke the silence one evening over a plate of Salisbury steak. "Everything okay, Waller?" he asked, his eyes full of a concern that was all the more powerful for its rarity. I forced a shrug, pushing mashed potatoes around my plate. "Just family stuff," I mumbled, the words feeling heavy and inadequate. Maria reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "Hey," she said, her usual boisterous energy softening. "You remember what we told you? We're your family here. You got us." Her words were a small shield, a momentary reprieve from the anxiety that was coiling in my gut. But even with their support, I couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. The storm was coming. It broke the night before the ceremony. My phone rang, and my mother's name lit up the screen. I let it ring twice before answering, my heart hammering against my ribs. This time, her voice wasn't manipulative or cloying. It was raw, undiluted panic. "Serena, listen to me. Jacob is on his way there. He left a few hours ago. He's furious, Serena. Please, for my sake, call your commanding officer. Tell them you're sick. Just cancel the ceremony. Please." A cold, hard calm settled over me. The fear was gone, replaced by something solid and unyielding. "No, Mom," I said, my voice even. "I'm not canceling. I earned this." Her panic dissolved into hysterical, wheezing sobs. "Why are you so stubborn? Why do you have to be so difficult? He's your brother. He's just a little hot-headed, that's all. You're going to ruin his future. You're destroying this family." Hot-headed. The phrase echoed in the chambers of my memory, unlocking a flood of buried images. I took a slow, deep breath, the air feeling sharp in my lungs. My voice, when I spoke, was dangerously quiet. "Mom," I began, the words measured and precise. "I was 14 when his hot head pushed me down a flight of stairs and sprained my wrist. I've spent 19 years being shamed and humiliated by his hot head. Right now, I'm carrying your grandchild, and you are on this phone begging me to hide, to run away, to protect the man who has threatened both me and this baby." A choked, desperate sound came from her end of the line. But he's Harold's son." That was it. That was the line. The final, clarifying truth. It wasn't about me, or Jacob, or even the baby. It was about him. Harold. The patriarch, the commander, whose golden boy could do no wrong. In that moment, something inside me didn't just break. It vaporized. The last lingering thread of hope for a mother's love, a hope I didn't even know I was still clinging to, turned to ash. There was no grief. There was no sadness. There was only the clean, cold emptiness of space, a void where a heart used to be. My voice when I spoke again was sharp and final. "Enough," I said. "I've heard enough." I ended the call. The silence that followed was absolute. I walked into the small bathroom, my movements stiff and robotic, and flicked on the light. I stared at my reflection in the mirror over the sink. I expected to see a scared, tear-streaked girl on the verge of collapse. But that's not who was looking back at me. The woman in the mirror had eyes that were not afraid. They were cold, hard, and blazing with a fire I had never seen before. Her jaw was set, her back was straight. I wasn't looking at Serena Waller, the victim. I was looking at Corporal Waller, United States Marine. And in that instant, I realized the fatal miscalculation they had all made. For years, they had treated me like prey, like a timid sheep to be herded and tormented for their amusement. They had cornered me, pushed me, and threatened me. thinking I would eventually just lie down and break. They never realized they weren't cornering a sheep. They had just backed a wolf into a corner. If you have ever had a moment in your life where you finally said, "Enough is enough," hit that like button to stand with everyone who found their strength. And if you believe I made the right choice, comment with a simple warrior below. I want to know you're with me. My hand reached for my phone, steady and sure. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. I scrolled through my contacts, bypassing Maria and Ben, bypassing everyone in my chain of command. I went straight to the top. I found the number for the office of the commanding general of the base, General Thorne. I knew it was an incredible breach of protocol, a leap over a dozen ranks. But this was an extraordinary situation. This was no longer a family squabble. This was a direct threat against a Marine on his base. I wasn't going to wait to be a casualty. I was reporting an imminent threat. The battle was coming, but it would be fought on my terms. The call from General Thorne's office came the morning of the ceremony. It was delivered by a stern-faced gunnery sergeant, and it was a summons, not an invitation. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had broken the chain of command in the most dramatic way possible. I had leaped over captains, majors, and colonels to get to the top. I walked across the base to the command building, my back ramrod straight, my mind preparing for a formal reprimand, or worse. General Thorne's office was exactly as you'd imagine, large and imposing, the walls adorned with commendations, ceremonial swords, and the proud flags of the United States and the Marine Corps. He wasn't sitting behind his massive mahogany desk. He was standing by the window, looking out over the parade grounds. He turned as I entered, and his expression wasn't angry. It was serious, unreadable. He gestured to one of the leather chairs in front of his desk. "Sit down, Corporal." I sat, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to keep them from shaking. "Corporal Waller," he began, his voice calm and even. "Report." It wasn't a question. It was a command. And my training took over. All the fear and emotion drained away, replaced by the focused clarity of a mission briefing. I delivered the report concisely, factually, without a tremor in my voice. I detailed the history of abuse, the pattern of manipulation, and the direct threats that had been made against me and my unborn child. I spoke not as a daughter, but as a Marine, reporting a clear and present danger. When I finished, the room was silent. General Thorne hadn't interrupted once. He had just listened, his gaze unwavering. "I have the recordings of the most recent calls, sir," I said, my voice steady. He nodded. "Proceed." I placed the small digital recorder on the polished surface of his desk. The wood felt cool and solid beneath my fingers. I pressed play. The toxic voices of my family filled that sacred space. Jacob's snarling hatred, Harold's cold, dismissive command, my mother's manipulative sobs. The general stood motionless, his hands clasped behind his back, his jaw tightening with every recorded word. The contrast between their chaotic cruelty and the quiet dignity of his office was staggering. When the last recording clicked off, the silence returned, heavier this time. General Thorne walked back to the window, his back to me. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, he turned around. "Thank you, Corporal," he said, and the formality was laced with something else. Respect. "You showed immense courage and foresight in gathering this intelligence." He began to pace slowly in front of the window. "Your family system failed to protect you. The Marine Corps will not." Those words hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was more powerful than any word of sympathy could ever be. It was validation. It was an acknowledgement from the highest authority I knew that my pain was real, that my fight was just. He informed me that he had already arranged for covert security to be present at the ceremony and had put the military police on high alert. The tragic events of that day unfolded just as I had feared. But the general's foresight meant that when Jacob attacked, the response was immediate and overwhelming. My next clear memory is of the sterile white walls of the Naval Hospital. The physical pain was a dull, throbbing ache, but the emotional pain was a gaping wound. I had lost the baby. I had lost my family. I had lost everything on that stage. But as the fog of grief and medication began to lift, a cold, hard resolve took its place. I remembered the serenity prayer, one my grandmother used to recite. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I couldn't change what they were. I couldn't change what they had done. But I could change what happened next. I asked Maria and Ben to bring my laptop from the barracks. With their quiet, unwavering support, I began the real work. I became a soldier preparing her arsenal. I spent hours listening to the recordings again, but this time I wasn't a victim reliving the trauma. I was an analyst, a detective. I transcribed every call, timestamping each threat, highlighting every admission of past abuse. The process was agonizing. Every word was a fresh cut. But with every piece of data I logged, a sense of control began to seep back into me. I was no longer drowning in the chaos of their abuse. I was mapping it, defining it, turning it into a weapon. I wrote a detailed, chronological statement documenting every incident I could remember, from the broken doll to the spit on my Thanksgiving plate to the stolen graduation party. I transformed the messy, chaotic pain of my past into a structured, orderly case file. My grief was the fuel, but discipline was the engine. A few days later, General Thorne came to visit me in the hospital. He wasn't alone. With him was a woman in the crisp uniform of a Marine captain. Her collar bore the insignia of the Judge Advocate General's Corps, the JAG. She was sharp, with intelligent eyes and an air of confidence that was both calming and formidable. "Corporal Waller," the general said, "this is Captain Jessica Morales. She's one of our finest prosecutors." He paused, then added, "She requested to take your case personally." Captain Morales stepped forward and offered a small, knowing smile. It wasn't a smile of pity, it was a smile of understanding. "Serena," she said, dropping the formalities and making it clear this was more than just a case. "I've been where you are. My family didn't believe me either." She looked me straight in the eye, and in her gaze I saw a reflection of my own fire. "We're going to win this fight. Not as a lawyer and a client, as Marines." The court-martial was held in a formal, sterile room on base that smelled of old wood and institutional polish. It was a space built for cold, hard facts. An American flag and the flag of the Marine Corps stood proudly in the corner, their colors a stark, solemn backdrop to the drama about to unfold. I walked in, flanked by Captain Jessica Morales, my own posture mirroring the rigid straightness of the flagpoles. Across the room, I saw them. Jacob was at the defendant's table, dressed in an expensive-looking suit, a smirk playing on his lips. He looked confident, almost bored, as if this were just an annoying administrative hurdle. My mother and Harold sat in the front row of the gallery. Harold sat stiffly, his face a mask of indignation. My mother wouldn't look at me. She just stared at her own hands, twisting them in her lap. I took my seat next to Captain Morales. I was wearing my service Alpha uniform, the green jacket and khaki shirt, a suit of armor I'd earned. I felt its weight on my shoulders, a reminder of who I was now. I was not a cowering victim. I was a witness. I was a Marine, ready to perform my duty. Jacob's civilian lawyer, a slick man with a gold watch, began his opening statement by painting a picture of me as an unstable, dramatic, and promiscuous young woman. He implied my pregnancy was the result of carelessness and that I was an attention seeker, prone to exaggeration. He was trying to build a narrative where I was the problem, the agent of chaos in an otherwise respectable family. When it was my turn to take the stand, he came at me with a barrage of carefully worded questions designed to trip me up. "Corporal Waller, isn't it true you had a contentious relationship with your family?" "I would describe it as abusive, sir," I answered calmly, my voice even. "And this pregnancy," he said, gesturing vaguely. "It wasn't from a long-term, committed relationship, was it?" "No, sir." "So you were emotional. Unstable, perhaps, after the relationship ended?" "No, sir. I was pregnant, and I was assaulted by your client." I answered every question with the same direct, factual simplicity. I refused to let him twist my words or lead me down a path of emotional speculation. I stuck to the facts, just as Captain Morales and I had rehearsed. This was a battlefield of words, and I would not give him an inch of ground. The tide began to turn when Harold was called as a character witness for Jacob. He walked to the stand with the unshakable arrogance of a man used to being the most powerful person in any room. He introduced himself as Colonel Harold Waller, United States Army, retired. He spoke glowingly of Jacob's athletic prowess and leadership potential. He painted me as a difficult, resentful child who had always been jealous of her brother. During cross-examination, Captain Morales was masterful. She approached him with deference. "Colonel Waller, thank you for your service. As a retired officer, you understand the importance of integrity and honor, correct?" "Of course," he boomed. "And you would agree that making a threat against a service member is a serious offense?" "Naturally." "Then why?" Captain Morales asked, her voice still respectful but with an edge of steel. "Did you call Corporal Waller and order her to handle the problem of her pregnancy and cancel the ceremony, a direct attempt to intimidate a witness and cover up a threat?" Harold's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he blustered. "Don't you?" Captain Morales said, turning to the panel. "Permission to play audio evidence file 3, Your Honor." The decisive blow, however, came when I was recalled to the stand. Captain Morales's questions were simple. "Corporal Waller, did your family contact you in the days prior to the ceremony?" "Yes, Captain." "Did they pressure you to cancel the event?" "Yes, Captain." "What did they say?" Jacob's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection. Hearsay." "Your Honor," Captain Morales said smoothly. "It's not hearsay if we have it on tape." She nodded to the tech sergeant. And then, the secret weapon was deployed. The recordings. Jacob's hate-filled voice, snarling that I was a stain and promising to expose me, echoed through the silent courtroom. Then came Harold's cold, commanding voice, calling my baby a problem and demanding I cancel the ceremony. And finally, my mother's tearful, manipulative pleading. The raw, undeniable toxicity filled the air, a poison cloud that choked out all of Jacob's lawyer's carefully constructed lies. I watched Jacob's face, the smug confidence drained away, replaced by a pale, slack-jawed shock. My mother hunched over, pressing her face into her hands, as if she could physically block out the sound of her own betrayal. The final witness was General Marcus Thorne. He took the stand with the quiet, immense gravity of a 4-star general. He described what he had witnessed at the ceremony, his testimony delivered in the clear, precise language of a military commander. He recounted the attack, Jacob's roar, and the state I was in when he reached me. Jacob's lawyer, desperate now, tried to cross-examine him. "General, isn't it possible you misinterpreted a simple family dispute?" General Thorne fixed the lawyer with a look of pure ice. "Counselor," he said, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the room, "I have served for 30 years in this corps. I know an assault when I see one. And what I saw on that stage was one of the most cowardly and dishonorable assaults I have ever had the misfortune to witness." His words landed with the finality of a guillotine. You could feel the entire case collapse. The panel of officers deliberated for less than 20 minutes. The foreman, a stern-faced colonel, stood and delivered the verdict. "On the charge of assault, this court finds the defendant guilty." The gavel slammed down, the sound cracking like a rifle shot in the silent room. Jacob crumpled in his chair, a strangled, guttural sob escaping his lips. My mother wailed. I didn't feel a surge of joy or triumph. There was no victory parade in my soul. There was only a vast, quiet, and profound sense of relief. The nightmare, at last, was over. There was no celebration after the verdict. No triumphant dinner, no popping of champagne corks. I walked back to my barracks room, the silence of the empty space wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. The war was over. I had won. But I felt hollow, an empty battlefield where victory and loss looked devastatingly similar. Justice had been served, but my baby was still gone. My family was shattered beyond repair. Captain Morales found me a few hours later, sitting on the edge of my bunk, just staring at the wall. She didn't offer congratulations. She just handed me a steaming styrofoam cup of black coffee. "This part is normal," she said, her voice gentle. There are casualties in every war, even the ones we win. Give yourself time to grieve what was lost. Her words gave me permission to feel something other than relief. The legal battle was over, but the war for my own healing had just begun. A request came the next day. My mother wanted to see me before she and Harold drove back to Charleston. I agreed to meet her at a small neutral coffee shop off base. I needed this meeting to be on my terms, away from the charged environments of the base or a home. She looked 10 years older than she had in the courtroom. The fight had drained her, leaving her looking frail and defeated. She started to cry before the waitress even brought our coffee, a torrent of words pouring out of her about how devastated Harold was, about how Jacob's life was ruined, about the shame this had all brought upon them. Not once did she ask how I was feeling. Not once did she mention the grandchild she had lost. Finally, her frantic monologue wound down. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "I know you're angry, Serena," she whispered. "But if you had just been a little more yielding, it never would have come to this." I looked at my mother, the woman who had given me life, and I felt no anger. The fire of my rage had burned out, leaving behind only the cold ashes of a profound and infinite sadness. It was the sadness of accepting a final, unchangeable truth. She would never understand. She was a permanent resident of their world, a world where Harold's pride was the son, and Jacob was the heir apparent. "Mom," I said, my voice soft but firm, devoid of accusation, "I've been yielding my entire life." I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. Her skin felt like paper. "I love you. I think I always will. But I can't live in their shadow anymore. I can't." That was the goodbye. The final boundary drawn not in anger, but in the quiet sorrow of self-preservation. I never saw Harold again. I didn't need to. Instead, I wrote him a letter. It wasn't long, and it contained no blame. I simply wrote the truth. "Sir," I began, using the title he valued above all else. "You taught me that honor is everything to a soldier. I have tried to live by that creed. I chose to tell the truth, as difficult as it was, because it was the honorable thing to do. I hope that one day you'll understand that honor isn't found in hiding a wrong, but in facing it." I sealed the envelope and mailed it from the base post office. I didn't expect a reply, and I never got one. It wasn't for him. It was for me. It was the final act of closing a door, my own declaration that I was reclaiming the definition of honor for myself. It was the last verse of a poem I'd found and held onto, a lifeline in the dark, Invictus. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. My final meeting was with General Thorne. I stood before his desk once more, but this time it was to submit my request for an honorable discharge. He reviewed the paperwork, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up at me, his eyes filled with a deep, paternal understanding. "You have served this corps with distinction, Waller," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "on and off the battlefield. The Marine Corps gave me my strength, and it gave me justice, sir," I replied, my voice steady. "Now I need to find my peace." He nodded slowly. "Go find it, Marine," he said, the words both a release and a blessing. "You've earned it." Walking out of his office and into the bright North Carolina sun, I didn't feel like I was quitting. This wasn't a retreat. It was a conscious choice. For the first time, I wasn't running from a painful past. I was walking toward an unknown future. A future that wouldn't be defined by a uniform, or by a family's expectations, or by the ghosts of what I had lost. It would be a future I would build myself, one quiet day at a time. I moved to Arlington, Virginia. It felt right, being close to the heart of the nation I had served. I rented a small apartment with a balcony that overlooked a quiet, tree-lined street. The peace was a stark contrast to the rigid order of the barracks and the suffocating tension of my childhood home. It was a blank slate. My mornings began with a run. Not the forced, grueling marches of Paris Island, but a quiet, solitary jog through the dew-kissed parks of a city waking up. I ran not because I was ordered to, but because I loved the feeling of the cool air on my face, the steady rhythm of my own feet on the pavement. I was reclaiming my body, not as a weapon, but as my own. I found a profound peace in simple, daily routines. The rich aroma of brewing coffee, the quiet rustle of pages in a book, the silent respect of visiting the city's monuments. One crisp autumn afternoon, I took the metro to Arlington National Cemetery. I walked for hours among the endless, uniform rows of white headstones, each one a testament to a life of service and sacrifice. The scale of it was humbling. Standing there, surrounded by the quiet dignity of the nation's heroes, I felt a sense of honor that was purer and deeper than any I had known before. I wasn't there as a Marine. I was there as a citizen, a survivor, paying my respects. I found a quiet, sun-dappled patch of grass, and I placed a single white rose upon it. It was a silent, private farewell to the child I never got to meet, a final acknowledgement of a life that was, however brief, a part of my own story. Captain Morales had given me a parting gift before she was reassigned, a phone number for an organization called The Mission Continues, a nonprofit that helps veterans find new purpose through community service. On a whim, I called. I started volunteering, just doing administrative work, filing papers, and answering phones in their DC office. I didn't talk about my past, I just wanted to be useful. The office ran a support group for female veterans who had experienced trauma. I sat in on a few meetings, just listening from the back of the room. I heard stories of combat, of loss, of struggles to readjust to civilian life. I heard echoes of my own pain in their voices. One evening, the group facilitator, a kind-eyed former Air Force captain, looked at me. "Serena," she said gently, "would you like to share?" My heart hammered in my chest. But looking at the faces of the women around me, I saw not judgment, but a deep, shared understanding. For the first time, I told my story. The words came out haltingly at first, my throat tight with unshed tears. But as I spoke, I saw the women nodding. I saw tears of empathy in their eyes. And in that moment, I realized my story had a power I never knew. It wasn't just my pain anymore. It was a mirror, reflecting their own struggles back at them, showing them they weren't alone. It was proof that survival was possible. It was proof that winning was possible. My small role as a volunteer slowly grew. I became a peer mentor, then a group leader. I found that the greatest healing came not from forgetting my past, but from using it as a bridge to connect with others. The wounds I carried became the very tools I used to help others stitch their own lives back together. The ugliest, most painful parts of my life were being transformed into my greatest source of purpose. A few years later, an invitation arrived. It was a request to be the keynote speaker at a national conference for veterans. The thought terrified me, but I knew I had to do it. I walked onto that stage, not in the crisp uniform of a Marine, but in a simple dress. The auditorium was vast, filled with hundreds of faces. A spotlight blinded me, and for a terrifying second, I was back on that other stage, the one at Camp Lejeune. But this time, there was no fear. I took a deep breath and stepped up to the podium. The hall fell silent. The last time I stood on a stage like this, I began, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the microphone. I lost everything. I told them my story, all of it, not with the anger of a victim, but with the calm clarity of a survivor who had navigated the darkness and found her own way into the light. The story ends here, but my life did not. It began. This morning, I woke before the sun. I stood on the balcony of my small Arlington apartment, a warm mug of coffee in my hands. I watched as the first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, catching the iconic dome of the U.S. Capitol building in the distance and setting it ablaze with golden light. I can still feel the faint, silver line of the scar on my abdomen, a permanent reminder of the battle I fought. But it doesn't ache anymore. It's a part of my map, the proof that I was tested and I endured. I don't forget the past, but I am no longer its prisoner. I have redefined honor, loyalty, and family on my own terms. My name is Serena Waller, a Marine, a survivor, a warrior. And I have finally found my own dawn. Thank you for listening to my journey. My story is proof that our deepest wounds can become our greatest strengths, and that we all have the power to create our own dawn. If you're on a journey of healing, I see you, and you are not alone. Tell me in the comments one thing you are looking forward to in your own new day. I would be honored to read it. If this story gave you hope, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of resilience. Your support helps create this space where we can all heal together. Thank you.